A recent article came out in Forbes Magazine entitled "Sounding the Alarm on Index Universal Life." In this article, the author, Ed Liefeld, sets out to make the case that Index Universal Life is a scam and a bad deal. It's a classic IUL hit piece filled with all the loaded terms and inflammatory phrases that you would expect from someone with an anti-IUL agenda. Well, in today's video, I'll go through that article paragraph by paragraph, revealing all the tools and ploys of an anti-IUL guru so that someday you'll have all the resources necessary to write an IUL hit piece of your own. He begins by saying, for more than a decade, Index Universal Life Insurance, IUL, has been one of the life insurance industry's most profitable businesses. New IUL premiums increased by 29% in the fourth quarter of 2021 alone, according to LIMRA, an industry-funded financial research company. Okay, so he's putting you on notice that IUL sales are exploding. He even injects the profit motive. He's doing this because he's about to make the case that this profit-induced growth is a blight that needs to be stamped out before it cartwheels out of control. Let's continue. There are now at least 52 insurers selling Index Universal Life Insurance, says Barry Flagg, president of Veralytic, a life insurance products rating service. Pacific Life is the biggest and holds about 19% of the market. But critics say Index Universal Life Insurance is being sold dishonestly. They are complex products sold with false promises and deceptive marketing, says Bernie Birnbaum, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Economic Justice. Stay away from them. Okay, here the author employs the number one rule of an IUL hit piece. Be sure to conflate scammy IUL agents and scammy IUL products. I couldn't agree more that these products are being sold in misleading ways by an army of IUL agents on TikTok and elsewhere. But even though IULs may at times be sold by agents who engage in deceptive marketing and sales practices, that doesn't mean that the products themselves are inherently deceptive. This is the very technique I called out in videos debunking the likes of Dave Ramsey, the White Coat Investor, Jeremy Schneider, Chris Kirkpatrick, and others. It's a classic hallmark of the quintessential IUL takedown. Let's continue. The cash value within an IUL policy is tied to an index. This might include plain vanilla ones such as the S&P 500 and the Russell 500 indices, but money could be going into more esoteric ones like Hang Seng, gold, and emerging markets. Here he employs another classic technique of the IUL hit piece. Try to convey that IULs have exotic components that are ripe for abuse. He isn't just talking about the S&P 500 here. After all, there's nothing really all that scandalous about the S&P 500. It's pretty mainstream stuff. But there are IUL agents, he affirms, who foist exotic-sounding indices like Hang Seng and other foreign indices upon unsuspecting consumers. Sounds super risky on the face of it, no? And of course, gold is for right-wing wackos who think that the world is coming to an end. Well, first of all, these indices aren't very common and are rarely, if ever, used. I certainly don't recommend them to my clients. This is a naked attempt to use exotic, esoteric language to push the IUL out onto the fringes of financial legitimacy, and it's employed to perfection. We read on. Options allow the holder to buy or sell the underlying index at a certain price at a certain time, which can rise or fall rapidly. If an option is exercised in the money, the payoff can be significant. But if the option expires out of the money, the entire investment in that option is lost. And this is why IUL is a riskier investment than traditional insurance. Critics say that risk is not properly disclosed and is borne by the policyholder. Okay, fraught language is the hallmark of an IUL hit piece, and this paragraph is loaded with it. He mentions that indices can rise or fall rapidly. Sounds scary, right? Also, your option could be lost, and therefore the IUL is risky. Look, the basic premise behind the IUL is upward exposure to the market with downside protection. And yes, insurance companies use options to pull that off. But at the end of the day, the very nature of the IUL is to protect your capital from rapidly falling markets. Let's face it, folks, the use of the words options, rise and fall rapidly, risky, critics, and not properly disclosed, all in the same paragraph, combine to paint a really apocalyptic landscape. And after reading such a paragraph, you would never suspect that the IUL's historical performance is between 5 and 7% net of fees over time, all while taking less risk than you might take in a typical bond portfolio with greater returns. All of the scandalous language is deftly calculated to play upon traditional stock market fears for a product whose very purpose is to allay those fears. He continues, consumers should avoid IUL because the insurers and agents who sell the products have no obligation to work in the consumer's best interest. Mix in massively complex products designed to juice illustrations with opaque and unaccountable features, and you have the recipe for future financial disaster, said Birnbaum in a July 2020 statement that warned consumers against buying IUL. Yet another hallmark of a classic IUL hit piece. Call upon the expert testimony of someone who has a serious axe to grind against IUL. Exhibit A, Bernie Birnbaum. Now, I 100% agree that IUL agents, especially the rogue ones on TikTok, have no obligation to work in the consumer's best interest. So proceed cautiously when commending your financial future to someone hawking insurance products on social media. It's like the Wild Wild West and is badly in need of reform. But does that necessarily mean that consumers should avoid IUL altogether, or are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater? With just a touch of nuance, Bernie could have just as easily said, while IUL might be a good fit for some people's financial situation, you must watch out for predatory IUL agents who may not ultimately have your best interests at heart. Instead, he paints with very broad brushstrokes, and the product's benefits get lost in the fray. Let's continue. Index universal life insurance is in the same class as other permanent life insurance policies, such as whole life insurance. This means that it won't expire the way term life insurance will, provided the premiums you're paying and policy account values are enough to keep the policy in force. Life insurance companies that sell traditional policies like whole life insurance invest primarily in corporate bonds and government-backed mortgages where the money will be safe and generate a small but reliable annual return each year. Okay, here we have another pillar of anti-IUL rhetoric. Compare the risks of the IUL against a product that is just slightly to the left of it on the risk continuum, and then blow those differences out of proportion. When describing whole life, he uses the word safe and reliable, words that are designed to put you at ease about what whole life delivers. But the minute you see those words as a reader, you should gird up your loins, because you know the hammer is about to fall. And indeed it does. Take a listen. An index universal life insurance policy is different. As the name implies, it takes yearly interest income from the bonds and mortgages underlying the policy and invests that interest in options on one or more indices. These policies are sold by insurance agents as a direct way to play the options market. The insurance company manages and buys the options rather than the policyholder, who expects to see additional gains in value while keeping the basic policy investment safe. It's a way for life insurance policyholders to have their cash value take part in the market. Okay, more loaded language here. These policies are sold by insurance agents as a way to play the options market. Sounds risky. Conjures up allusions to a Las Vegas casino. Classic stuff here, but why would you use such language when describing a product that's consistently earned 5 to 7% net of fees over time? It seems oddly incongruent. But then again, IUL hit pieces are often rife with characterizations that are oddly incongruent. We continue. While it's true that index universal life insurance offers a bigger upside than a traditional life policy in a good year, like 2021 when the S&P index rose 26.9%, and while it can protect against investment loss, the costs associated with an IUL can drain the policy of its value. Here's another stock technique of the IUL hitman. Try to show that the IUL has huge upside and a downside that could sink your financial ship. Here, the author claims that the costs associated with an IUL can drain the policy of its value. I will go on record now as saying that if you buy your IUL from a reputable company and you structure and fund it properly, then short of enduring 5 straight down years in the market, your IUL will not be drained of its policy value. In fact, if you stick with your IUL, you will find that the average internal expenses per year will eventually fall as low as 0.5%. That is as low or lower than most 401ks. Let us persist. To afford the budget for the money management involved in options trading and compensate the insurer and its agent, IUL policies can include significantly more fees and costs than an average life insurance policy. One insurer charges upward of 8% of the premiums and cash value in the policy in the first year alone. According to Stephen Roth, president of Wealth Management International, an insurance analyst and litigation consultant, that's more than most hedge funds. Here, the author confuses a couple of different fees and betrays a superficial understanding of how the IUL really works. You must do this at least once in your IUL hit piece. While it is true that new premiums generally have a sales load that range anywhere from 5 to 8%, the author makes a crucial error. That same sales load does not also get applied to the cash value. In that regard, IUL is most decidedly not like a hedge fund. Once the insured is done funding the policy, assuming at least 10 years have passed, the premium load and most of the administrative fees disappear altogether. And what the insured is left with is simply the cost of insurance. You most certainly are not paying a premium load on the cash value. And if the author gets this crucial detail wrong, you have to wonder what else he's getting wrong. You see, this is a recurring theme among those who malign Index Universal Life. They have just enough knowledge to make the IUL sound nefarious. But when pressed on important details, they collapse like a house of cards. I noticed this with the white coat investor who in his IUL hit piece claimed that IULs have both a cap and a participation rate on the very same index. Let's forge ahead. These fees threaten to drain your policy's cash value during adverse periods when the market or whatever index the policy is tied to plunges. If internal costs cause the policy account value to drop too much, your policy is at risk of lapsing and you'll have to pay more in premiums just to keep the policy intact. Once again, our hitman raises the specter of fees draining the policy if the market plunges. Look, the market only plunges 2 or 3 times every decade, so your IUL would be credited 2 to 3 times every 10 years. But in the other 78 years, you would be credited whatever the market did up to a cap. And if these indices are as volatile as the author claims, then that means that between 7 and 8 years every decade, the IUL would be credited at or near whatever that cap rate happens to be. Let's assume a 10% cap. So roughly 7 or 8 years out of every 10, you might experience growth at or near the full 10%. That averages out to be about 7.5% per year. Once again, his use of scandalous rhetoric mischaracterizes a product whose very purpose is to provide you safe and productive growth without taking any more market risk than what you're accustomed to taking in your savings account. Let's see what other tricks he has up his sleeve. When the S&P 500 dropped 500 points in March 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis, the policy's investment loss was 0 if measured from the previous year, but the monthly policy expenses may have caused losses of several percent in the value of the policy. And if it went down too much, then policyholders got a premium call requiring them to put in more money, says Roth. If you don't keep paying the higher premiums to keep the policy in force, you risk losing all previously paid premiums, as well as the death benefit going forward. As you write your IUL hit piece, you must engage in rampant fear-mongering. Even though a properly structured IUL is impervious to the effects of a single down year, this is your perfect opportunity to wax apocalyptic. Again, if we're talking 5 down years in a row, we do have a problem. But IULs are designed to shield you from the effects of a down year, or even 2 consecutive down years in the market. Okay, the next part is perhaps my favorite part of the article. Let's take a listen. In one example cited by Veralytic, a person could pay $367,000 over 6 years on an IUL policy and get nothing back if the policy is canceled. When a policyholder tries to surrender the policy, the insurer might keep the entire first year's premium since it has already paid the commission costs to the agent who sold the policy. Classic technique. Describe a nightmare scenario with devastating consequences, but withhold most of the crucial details and context. First of all, this claim is meaningless unless we know all of the other details of the policy. Was it designed to have maximum death benefit and minimum cash value? Was there a guarantee involved? If so, then a low surrender value would be expected. Furthermore, given a large enough death benefit, the same could be said of term life insurance. A person could pay $367,000 over 6 years into a term life policy and get nothing back if the policy was canceled. Take that, Dave Ramsey. We just don't have enough information here to make heads or tails of the claim, but it sure sounds scandalous on the face of it. Are you starting to see how inflammatory language, extreme examples, and a convenient omission of details can turn your IUL hit piece into a classic? I was once told that you can always tell an author's predilections by simply reading their articles. Never is that more the case than with this author. We continue. Policy values in IULs are depressed for many years due to high upfront charges and high surrender fees, says Roth, adding that these typically last for more than 10 years after the policy was taken out. Roth was recently part of a class action lawsuit against Prudential Insurance Company involving overbilling and improperly lapsing universal life insurance policies. He is working on another one against Pacific Life over deceptive sales practices concerning the earnings potential of indexed universal life insurance policies. Dave Ramsey is perhaps the best at employing this anti-IUL technique. Focus on the costs and fees in the first 10 years, regardless of how low these fees drop in years 11 plus, and regardless of how long the customer plans on keeping the policy. As I've repeatedly said, don't own an IUL if you're planning on keeping it for only 5 or 10 years. It only makes sense to get one if you plan on keeping it until death do you part. The fees are much higher in the early years, and they're much lower in the latter years, but when you average them out over the life of the program, it will cost you less than 1% of your cash value per year. Like I said earlier, perhaps even as low as 50 basis points. The author could have just as easily written an article entitled "Sounding the Alarm on 401ks," in which he warned, if you try to touch your money prior to 59.5, that premature withdrawal will be taxed at your highest marginal tax bracket, plus a 10% penalty. So don't do a 401k. The risks are too great. In short, most mainstream government-sponsored retirement plans have heavy penalties in the early years. So people don't typically make contributions to their 401ks if they have a 10-year investment horizon. They do it if they're planning on benefiting from it their entire life. The same courtesy should be afforded the IUL. The article goes on, but my time is short. But my heartiest congratulations, you are now fully equipped to write an IUL hit piece of your own. Remember, be sure to use inflammatory, loaded terms, make convenient omissions, use extreme examples, and make material errors when creating your hit piece. But just be prepared, when you do write your hit piece, someone who knows more about IUL than you, who knows maybe even me, will come along and debunk each one of your claims, one by one. If you want to learn the truth about how IUL can help you build a tax-free retirement, be sure to check out my tax-free toolkit. You can download it for free at taxfreetoolkit.com. If you're a financial professional and want to learn how to become a certified Power Zero advisor, head over to powerzero.com and opt into my free 3-part video series. By the way, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them into the comment section below. I respond to every single one of them personally. And don't forget to click like, subscribe, and the bell so you never miss a video. This is Dave McKnight. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.